Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. The morning air felt crisp as I stepped out of the house, ready to start my daily jog. The neighborhood was still asleep, the streets mostly empty except for the occasional car passing by. My shoes hit the pavement with a steady rhythm, the familiar route comforting in its predictability. Every day I would jog the same path, stretching at the same old oak tree before heading back home. It was a routine that brought me a sense of peace and control in a world that often felt chaotic. As I neared the oak tree where I always stopped to stretch, something strange caught my eye. Sitting right at the base of the tree was a pair of shoes, blood-stained and eerily placed side by side. I slowed my pace, my heart beginning to hammer in my chest as I approached cautiously. The blood was dark and dried, soaking into the worn leather of the shoes. A sense of dread crept over me as I stood there, unsure of what to do. For a moment, I just stared at them, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a prank, I thought, though deep down I knew it felt too deliberate, too real. There were no other signs of struggle or injury around, only those shoes sitting perfectly in place. The silence of the morning felt heavier now, pressing down on me. I instinctively looked around, scanning the nearby bushes and street corners, but there was no one in sight. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling slightly, and debated calling 911. I felt ridiculous standing there, a grown adult spooked by a pair of shoes, but something deep inside warned me not to dismiss it. Instead of making the call, I took a few photos, thinking it might be better to have some record in case I needed it later. I backed away from the tree, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. My feet moved faster than usual as I turned and continued my jog, my mind unable to settle. The rest of the route passed in a blur, my usual enjoyment replaced by an urgent need to get home. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to leap out from the shadows. When I finally reached my front door, I practically slammed it shut behind me and locked it. I leaned against it, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Part of me wanted to forget about it entirely, to pretend it had been some bizarre coincidence. Later that morning, after a shower and a strong cup of coffee, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photos I had taken. The shoes looked even more ominous on the screen, the blood stark against the faded brown leather. I zoomed in, hoping to spot some clue, but there was nothing unusual beyond the obvious. No initials, no markings, nothing that could explain why they were there. I considered again whether I should report it, but decided to wait and see if anything turned up in the news. The day passed slowly, my mind never straying far from the image of those shoes. Every noise outside made me jump, and I found myself locking the doors and windows even though it was broad daylight. By evening, I had convinced myself it was probably nothing serious. Maybe someone had a bad nosebleed, or maybe it was just a sick joke. The rational part of me tried to push away the fear, but it lingered like a shadow at the back of my mind. The next morning I debated skipping my jog, but ultimately decided against it. I refused to let fear dictate my life, and besides, it was probably just a one-time thing. I laced up my shoes and stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin. I set a brisk pace, feeling slightly on edge but determined to reclaim my routine. As I approached the oak tree, I slowed down, my stomach twisting into knots. To my relief, the shoes were gone. The area looked just as it always had, the only sign of disturbance a few scattered leaves. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding and stepped forward to do my usual stretches. As I reached down to touch my toes, I noticed a small piece of paper wedged between two roots. Curious, I picked it up, noting the faint smears of blood along the edge. Unfolding it carefully, I found a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. It read, "You are being watched." My hands shook as I dropped the note, backing away from the tree in terror. I spun around, scanning the empty street, but again there was no one. The neighborhood was as still and silent as ever, but now it felt sinister, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I ran home without stopping, my lungs burning and my mind racing. Once inside, I bolted the door and pulled the curtains shut, trying to block out the outside world. I considered calling the police but hesitated, unsure of what they could even do. It was just a pair of shoes and a creepy note, no real crime to investigate. I sat on the couch, heart hammering, trying to decide what to do next. Over the next few days, I changed my routine. I jogged at different times, took different routes, and never lingered in one place for too long. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call for help at a moment's notice. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, someone playing a sick joke, but deep down I knew it had been directed at me. I could feel it in the way the hair on the back of my neck would stand up for no reason. Weeks passed and nothing else happened. Slowly, the fear began to fade, though I remained cautious. I started jogging in the afternoons instead of early mornings, choosing busier routes where there were always people around. I never went back to the oak tree, avoiding that part of the neighborhood entirely. Life began to feel normal again, the terror becoming just another strange memory. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take a different route altogether, one that led through a nearby park. It was lively and full of families, joggers, and cyclists. I felt safe among the crowd, the laughter of children, and the chatter of friends pushing away the memories of that frightening morning. I found a new spot to stretch, a bench near a fountain, and made it a part of my new routine. Jogging became enjoyable again, the fear no longer dictating my actions. I never saw the shoes again, and no more notes appeared. It was as if whoever had been watching had lost interest, or maybe had simply moved on. I still stayed alert, but the paralyzing fear was gone, replaced by a cautious sense of strength. I had faced something unknown and refused to let it control me. Some days when the air was just right and the world felt particularly quiet, I would think back to that morning. I would wonder who had placed the shoes there and why, and what they had hoped to achieve. I would never know, and maybe that was for the best. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when the answer could be far worse than the imagination. As I finished another jog and stretched by the fountain, I realized how far I had come since that terrifying morning. I had adapted, grown stronger, and refused to be broken by fear. Life would always have its moments of darkness, but I knew now that I could endure them. The world could be unpredictable and frightening, but I had learned to find peace and strength in the midst of it. And that was something no one could take away from me. Story 2. Selling the old desk felt like a relief. It had been sitting in the garage for years, gathering dust and taking up space I desperately needed. The buyer came quickly after I listed it, barely asking any questions before handing over the cash. I helped load the desk into the back of a battered pickup truck and watched as it drove away. I thought that was the end of it. A few days later, I heard a knock at the door just as I was about to head out. When I opened it, there was the same buyer, looking nervous and twitchy. Without saying much, he motioned toward the truck, where the desk was once again sitting in the bed. He said he no longer wanted it and insisted on returning it without offering much of an explanation. I was surprised but not interested in arguing, so I took the desk back. Once the truck pulled away, I stood in the driveway, staring at the desk like it had grown a new meaning. It looked just the same as before, a little more scuffed maybe, but otherwise unchanged. I figured I could try selling it again or maybe donate it. I wheeled it back into the garage, not thinking too much about it. I only noticed the flash drive when I was moving the desk into a better spot. It was small, black, and had been taped carefully to the underside of the desk drawer. Whoever placed it there had made sure it was well hidden. At first I thought it might have been the buyer playing a prank, but the seriousness in his face when he returned the desk suggested otherwise. My curiosity got the better of me. I peeled the flash drive off and wiped away the sticky residue before heading back into the house. I sat at the kitchen table with the flash drive resting between my fingers. Part of me wanted to toss it straight into the trash. Another part, the stronger one, needed to know what was on it. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. For a moment, nothing happened, and I almost breathed a sigh of relief. Then a single folder appeared on the screen. It was labeled "Open Me" in all caps. I hesitated, hovering the mouse over the folder, debating whether to listen to the warning bells ringing in my head. Curiosity once again won out. I clicked the folder open and found a series of video files, each with a date and timestamp. The first file was from almost 2 years ago. I clicked on it, and the screen flickered to life with grainy footage. The camera appeared to be hidden in a room, showing a woman sitting at a desk much like mine. She looked worried, glancing over her shoulder often as she typed something quickly. I watched, unsettled by how tense she seemed. The second file was even more disturbing. The woman was arguing with someone just out of frame, her voice low but desperate. I could not make out what they were saying, but it was clear that she was scared. At one point, she grabbed something from the drawer of the desk and clutched it tightly. I paused the video and leaned back in my chair, heart racing. There were more files, stretching over months. I watched a few more, each one darker than the last. The woman became more withdrawn, more fearful. In one video, she cried silently at the desk, clutching her head in her hands. I realized that whoever had set up the camera had been spying on her. My stomach turned at the thought. I backed out of the folder and ejected the flash drive, feeling dirty for even having watched those clips. I placed the drive back on the table, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend I had never seen it. Another part of me felt a growing sense of responsibility. I decided to go back to the garage and inspect the desk more closely. I turned it over and pulled out the drawers, looking for any more hidden surprises. Nothing else seemed out of the ordinary, but the idea that the desk had been used for something sinister refused to leave my mind. I sat on the cold concrete floor, feeling overwhelmed. After some time, I realized that the woman in the videos might still be in trouble, or worse. Maybe the person who had been recording her had never been caught. Maybe that was why the buyer had returned the desk so quickly, realizing too late what he had taken home. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I decided I could not just ignore it. I pulled out my phone and called the local police station. I explained what I had found, careful not to mention how many videos I had watched. The officer on the other end of the line took it seriously and said someone would be dispatched to my home shortly. I hung up and placed the flash drive back into a sealed envelope. Within an hour, a patrol car pulled up to the curb. 2 officers stepped out and made their way to the front door. I invited them inside and explained everything again, handing over the envelope with the flash drive inside. They asked if they could take the desk as well for further inspection. I agreed without hesitation. They loaded the desk into the back of a larger police van and assured me they would follow up if they found anything. I watched from the front step as they drove away, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. I hoped that whatever they found would help whoever had been hurt. Days passed without any news. I tried to distract myself with work and chores, but the desk and the videos haunted my thoughts. I could not stop wondering about the woman and what had happened to her. I wished I had done something sooner, even though I had not known. Finally, a week later, my phone rang. It was the police. They informed me that the videos on the flash drive had been crucial in an ongoing investigation. The woman in the footage had been reported missing years ago, and the evidence I had turned in helped them track down the person responsible. They had made an arrest. Relief washed over me in a wave so strong I had to sit down. The officer thanked me for doing the right thing and said that the woman's family would finally have some answers. Though it could not undo the pain, it was a step toward justice. I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in days. The experience changed the way I looked at things. I realized how easy it was to stumble into someone else's nightmare without even knowing it. I felt grateful that I had trusted my instincts and made the call. I knew I had done the right thing. In the end, a dusty old desk had become the key to helping someone find peace. Story 3. I had been working the night shift at a car rental agency for a few months before I noticed anything unusual. The job itself was simple enough. I checked and returned vehicles, logged their mileage, cleaned them, and prepared them for the next customer. Most nights were quiet, with only a few cars coming in after hours. It was the kind of work where your mind could wander if you were not careful. One night, a black sedan was returned about 15 minutes before midnight. The customer seemed in a rush, barely making eye contact before handing me the keys and hurrying off. I did the usual inspection, noting a few scratches on the bumper but nothing major. When I started vacuuming the interior, I noticed a small, black object tucked under the passenger seat. It looked like a piece of a charger at first. Curious, I pulled it out and realized it was a small device with a blinking light. I flipped it over and saw a magnet on the back. It clicked immediately in my head that this was not something that belonged in a rental car. I held it for a few moments, feeling the weight of it in my hand, wondering who had put it there and why. At first, I thought it might be some kind of mistake, maybe even a piece of the car's equipment. I decided to take it inside and ask the day shift manager about it the next morning. Still, something about it made my skin crawl. I kept it on my desk and moved on to the next vehicle that had been dropped off earlier that evening. It was a red SUV that had seen better days. While checking the back seat, I found another similar device wedged between the seat cushions. This one looked identical to the first, down to the blinking light and magnetic backing. My heart began to pound in my chest. 2 devices in 2 different vehicles felt like too much of a coincidence to ignore. I lined them up on my desk and stared at them for a while, unsure of what to do next. Calling the police seemed dramatic, but ignoring it felt wrong. I spent the next hour checking every returned car from that night. Out of 6 vehicles, 3 had these little trackers hidden inside them. The thought sent a chill up my spine. By the time the sun started to rise, I had a small collection of 5 tracking devices sitting in a row on my desk. I barely slept after my shift, replaying every possible scenario in my head. Who would be tracking these cars, and for what reason? I thought about everything from stolen cars to private investigations to something even worse. My imagination ran wild. When my manager came in, I showed the devices to him immediately. His face darkened as he looked at them, and he picked one up carefully. He asked if I had touched them directly, and I admitted I had. He told me to put on gloves next time in case there were fingerprints. We called the local police station, and an officer arrived within an hour. He took photos of the devices and collected them for evidence. He asked a lot of questions about who had rented the vehicles last, where they had been returned, and if anything else unusual had happened recently. I told him everything I knew, but it did not feel like much. For the next few nights, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. Every time a car pulled into the lot, I felt a jolt of nervous energy shoot through me. I started checking under seats and in glove compartments before even starting the intake paperwork. I found 2 more devices that week. It was becoming a pattern. The police said they were investigating, but they did not share much. I figured they did not want to panic anyone, especially customers. Word about something like that could destroy the reputation of the rental place. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet and kept my eyes open. One night, a man came in to return a car, and something about him immediately felt off. He was polite but overly interested in my routine. He asked if I did all the inspections myself and if the cars were cleaned at night. I answered casually, pretending not to notice the strange line of questioning. After he left, I inspected the car thoroughly. Sure enough, another tracker was hidden under the driver's seat. I reported it to the police again, and they asked me to try to remember everything about the man. I described him as best I could, from his height to the color of his jacket. A few nights later, an unmarked police car started parking across the street from the rental lot. The officer inside would wave at me sometimes, but mostly he just sat there. It made me feel a little safer, knowing someone was close by. Still, I remained jumpy and alert at all times. Weeks went by, and fewer trackers were found. It seemed like whoever had been placing them realized the game was up. The police eventually told my manager that they had made an arrest. They said it involved a private investigator who had gone rogue, tracking people without their consent for a range of shady clients. Apparently, he had been placing trackers in rental cars because they were easy targets. Different people rented them every day, making it difficult to pin down who was being followed. The discovery had led to several lawsuits and a full-blown investigation into multiple agencies in the area. Hearing that made my skin crawl all over again. I thought about how close I had been to danger without even realizing it. All those quiet nights alone at the lot, completely unaware that something sinister was unfolding right under my nose. It made me rethink how much trust I placed in the world around me. After everything settled down, the company installed new security measures. We now inspected every car with handheld scanners that could detect hidden devices. Staff received special training on what to look for and how to handle anything suspicious. I took some comfort in knowing we were better prepared now. Despite everything, I stayed on the night shift. I figured if something strange were going to happen, I would rather be there to catch it early. Plus, I had developed a sharp eye for anything that seemed out of place. It became a point of pride for me. Those months taught me to trust my instincts and never take anything for granted. Working nights at a car rental place might seem like an ordinary job, but it had exposed me to something few people ever encounter. In the end, I was grateful for the experience, even if it had shaken me at the time. Life eventually returned to a calm rhythm. I continued doing my job, checking cars, cleaning interiors, and greeting customers with a smile. The fear and uncertainty faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. I knew now that I could handle more than I had ever given myself credit for. Every time I found something unusual, my heart still raced a little, but it was different now. I was prepared, alert, and ready. Working those nights had changed me in ways I had not expected, and for that I was strangely thankful. Story 4. When I first joined the dating app, I did not expect anything serious to come out of it. It felt more like a distraction from the monotony of my everyday life. I swiped left and right without much thought, not taking anything too seriously. Then I matched with someone whose profile was simple yet intriguing. Their message came almost immediately after the match, and we started talking. The conversation flowed naturally, almost too naturally. We had similar interests, the same taste in movies, and even shared a few obscure hobbies. I told myself it was a coincidence, a lucky match, something rare but possible. After a few days of messaging, we decided to meet in person. I was nervous but also excited to meet someone who seemed to understand me so well. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop in the heart of the city. It was a cozy place, filled with the comforting scent of fresh pastries and brewing coffee. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee ready. They smiled warmly, and I felt my nerves ease a little. The first few minutes were filled with the usual small talk. We talked about work, hobbies, and our favorite books. Everything felt easy, almost too easy, like talking to an old friend. Then the conversation took a strange turn that left me feeling unsettled. They mentioned a park where I used to play as a child, describing it with details so specific that it made my heart race. I had never talked about that park online, not even in passing. It was a hidden gem from my childhood, a place that very few people knew I frequented. I laughed awkwardly and asked how they knew about it. They smiled and shrugged, saying it must have come up in conversation. But I knew it had not. I had been careful about what I shared online and with strangers. My mind started racing, trying to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was a lucky guess, or maybe we had mutual friends I had forgotten about. As the conversation continued, they brought up more details from my past. They mentioned my childhood dog, describing its appearance and even recalling its name. That dog had died when I was 10, and I had never posted about it anywhere. My chest tightened with unease, and I forced a smile. I asked them again, more firmly this time, how they knew these things. They laughed it off, calling it intuition, saying they were good at reading people. Their response did not sit well with me, but I did not want to cause a scene. I excused myself to the bathroom to gather my thoughts. Inside the small bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my heart pounding. Was I overreacting? Maybe there was some explanation I was not seeing. I took a few deep breaths and told myself to stay calm. I could finish the coffee and leave without making a big deal. When I returned to the table, their demeanor had shifted slightly. They seemed more serious, almost somber. They told me they had something to confess. Part of me wanted to get up and leave, but curiosity pinned me to the seat. I nodded for them to continue. They explained that they had recognized me from years ago. We had crossed paths when we were children, though I had no memory of it. They had never forgotten me and had looked me up online years later. They pieced together bits of information from public records, old articles, and social media crumbs. Hearing this made my skin crawl. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt before. This was not just a match gone wrong. This was someone who had quietly watched my life unfold from the shadows. I struggled to keep my expression neutral, while my mind screamed at me to get out. I told them I needed to leave and thanked them for their honesty. They did not protest or try to stop me. They just nodded and watched as I gathered my things. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like emerging from a nightmare. The air outside was cool and sharp, waking me up from the haze. On the way home, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every passing glance felt loaded with hidden meaning. When I got home, I locked the door and closed all the blinds. I sat in the dark for a long time, trying to process what had happened. I decided not to confront them any further. I blocked them on the app and reported the incident to the platform. I deleted my account altogether, realizing that the safety I had felt behind a screen was an illusion. It was a harsh lesson, but one I knew I had to take seriously. For days after, I found myself looking over my shoulder. I changed my privacy settings on all my accounts. I removed old posts, photos, anything that could be used to track pieces of my life. It felt like erasing parts of myself, but it was necessary for peace of mind. Eventually, the fear faded into a cautious awareness. I started to feel safe again, though more guarded. Meeting new people no longer felt light and carefree. There was always a voice in the back of my mind reminding me to be careful. I learned to trust that voice. In time, I met other people through safer, more controlled environments. Friends of friends, community events, places where trust could be built naturally. I stopped relying on apps that made meeting strangers feel like a game. Real connections took time, and I was willing to be patient. Looking back, I realized that experience taught me more than just about internet safety. It reminded me of the importance of boundaries and self-respect. It showed me that I deserved to feel safe and that it was okay to walk away from anything that made me feel otherwise. Today I am much happier and more grounded. I built a circle of friends and relationships based on trust, not algorithms. I still think about that encounter sometimes, but it no longer holds power over me. It is just a chapter I have closed. I know now that protecting my peace is more important than satisfying curiosity. I have learned to listen to my instincts, to trust my gut when something feels off. There is strength in walking away, in choosing myself every time. And for that, I am grateful. Story 5. It started one night when I got a message asking if they could crash at my place for a while. They said they were going through a rough patch and needed somewhere safe to stay. I had a small one-bedroom apartment, but the couch was comfortable enough for a few nights. I agreed without thinking too much about it because that was just the kind of person I was. I thought helping someone out in their time of need was the right thing to do. At first, everything seemed fine. They were polite and grateful, making small talk and offering to help with chores. I went about my usual routine, working during the day and relaxing at night. It felt nice to have someone around for a change, even if it was only temporary. I believed that a little kindness could go a long way. After the first few days, I noticed small things that did not sit right with me. They would stay up late, wandering around the apartment when they thought I was asleep. Sometimes I would find drawers slightly open or things moved just a little from where I left them. At first I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was being too suspicious. I convinced myself that they were just trying to find a charger or something harmless. One evening I came home from work earlier than usual. I opened the door quietly, expecting to find them watching television or maybe napping. Instead, I caught them at the kitchen counter with my keys in hand. They had a piece of clay or putty pressed against them, trying to make an impression. For a moment, we both froze, the shock hanging heavy in the room. They immediately started making excuses, saying they had lost their own keys somewhere and were just trying to figure out a way to make a new copy. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing how wrong I had been to trust so easily. My stomach twisted in knots as I thought about what could have happened if I had not come home early. I calmly asked them to leave right away, not wanting to escalate the situation further. They tried to argue, tried to make me feel guilty for kicking them out. I stayed firm, repeating that it was time for them to go. They gathered their things in a rush, slamming the door behind them as they left. I locked it immediately, double-checking every window and door after they were gone. The safety I once felt in my own home was suddenly shattered. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, keys clutched tightly in my hand, replaying everything in my mind. It hurt more than I expected, the betrayal cutting deeper than any argument or falling out I had experienced before. Trust was not something I gave easily, and now it felt like a mistake. I wondered how many times they had thought about taking advantage of me while I was just trying to be a good friend. It was a heavy weight to carry. The next day, I called a locksmith to change the locks. It cost more money than I wanted to spend, but the peace of mind was worth every penny. Watching the locksmith work, I promised myself I would be more careful from now on. Being kind was important, but it was just as important to protect myself. I needed to find a better balance between helping others and keeping my own life secure. Over the next week, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting them to show up and cause trouble. Every time the doorbell rang or a shadow passed the window, my heart raced. Slowly, those feelings started to fade, replaced by a stronger sense of confidence. I learned how to trust my instincts again, not to brush off that small voice inside that warned me when something felt wrong. It was a hard lesson, but one that would stay with me. I also realized that my home needed to be my sanctuary, a place where I felt completely safe. From then on, I made strict rules about who I allowed into my personal space. It was not about being cruel or selfish. It was about preserving the peace and comfort I worked so hard to build. I understood that setting boundaries was not a betrayal of kindness, but an extension of it. No, friends who truly respected me would never put me in a position like that. They would understand that my trust was a gift, not something to be manipulated. I surrounded myself with people who proved themselves through their actions, not just their words. It took time, but eventually the fear and hurt faded into something else. It became a sense of strength, a quiet reminder of how far I had come. Life went on, and so did I. I filled my apartment with new memories, laughter, and the warmth of people who appreciated me. The couch became a spot for movie nights and lazy weekends, not a reminder of broken trust. Every time I locked my new door, it was like a small promise to myself. I would not let fear rule me, but I would also never forget what it taught me. Looking back, I was proud of how I handled everything. It would have been easy to become bitter or closed off. Instead, I chose to grow stronger, wiser, and more mindful. Trust was still something I believed in, but now it came with a layer of self-respect. I knew that being kind and being cautious could live side by side. But if I ever found myself in a similar situation again, I would listen to my gut without hesitation. I would offer help, but with clear boundaries and an eye on my own well-being. I realized that it was possible to be a good person without being taken advantage of. Protecting myself did not make me less kind, it made me smarter. It was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The experience shaped me in ways I did not expect. It made me stronger, more self-aware, and more compassionate toward myself. I understood that mistakes happen, and sometimes they are necessary for growth. Instead of regretting my decision to help, I chose to see it as a stepping stone toward becoming a better version of myself. I learned to forgive, not just them, but also myself. At the end of the day, I still believed in kindness. I still believed in offering help to those who needed it. But now I knew that true kindness includes kindness to myself. I was not just giving trust away anymore, I was making sure it was earned. And in doing so, I found a deeper peace than I ever thought possible. My home became a place of safety once again. I filled it with light, music, and all the little things that made me happy. It became a space that reflected the new version of myself, one who had learned from the past but was not trapped by it. Every day I woke up in that space, it reminded me of the strength it took to reclaim it. And I was grateful for that strength. Even now, when I see the keys hanging by the door, I smile a little to myself. They are a symbol of everything I have learned, everything I have overcome. Trust, caution, resilience, and forgiveness all tied together in a small, simple object. Life continued to move forward, and so did I, stronger, wiser, and more at peace with the world around me. Story 6. I started my shift at 9 a.m. sharp, clocking in and grabbing my name tag from the counter. The store was already buzzing with customers browsing through clothes, electronics, and home goods. I pulled a cart toward the front and began setting out a new display of coffee makers, carefully arranging each one on the shelves. As I adjusted one of the boxes, I noticed someone standing a little too close, watching every move I made. I gave a polite smile and continued working, figuring they were just eager to snag one of the machines. After finishing the coffee makers, I moved to the bedding section where I began folding and organizing sheets. No sooner had I touched a new set of deep blue sheets than the same customer swooped in, grabbing the very set I had just folded. I blinked, a little thrown off, but shrugged it off as a coincidence. Maybe they had been looking for that color and size, and I just happened to make it easier for them. I stacked the rest neatly, doing my best to ignore the strange feeling starting to creep in. As the morning rolled on, I made my way to the small appliance section, restocking blenders and toasters. Again, whatever item my hands brushed against seemed to become a target for the same customer. I placed a sleek silver blender on the shelf, and within seconds they plucked it off and placed it into their cart. I rubbed the back of my neck, puzzled, but kept going, telling myself not to read too much into it. Around noon, I took a short break and grabbed a bottle of water from the staff fridge. When I returned to the floor, the same customer was still there, cart now overflowing with the items I had stocked. I tried to move quicker, hoping to avoid further attention, but it did not matter. No matter how fast I worked, they seemed determined to follow and collect every single thing I touched. At first, it was a little funny in a bizarre way. I even chuckled quietly to myself while rearranging some picture frames, wondering if I had become some sort of good luck charm. Maybe they thought my touch made the items more valuable. But as the hours dragged on and their cart grew fuller, the humor drained away, leaving only unease. I started to feel like a piece of merchandise myself, something they were just waiting to claim. I decided to test it, picking up a random knick-knack from the clearance bin, a chipped ceramic cat, and pretending to study it intently. Within moments, the customer snatched it from my hands and added it to their cart without hesitation. My stomach tightened. It was no coincidence. This person was intentionally following me, buying everything I interacted with, no matter how random or broken it was. The supervisor called me over to help tidy up the shoe section, a messy corner where boxes were often left scattered. I hurried over, relieved for the change of scenery. As I bent down to restack a pile of sneakers, a shadow fell across the aisle. I glanced up to see the customer standing there, eyes locked on my hands. I grabbed a worn-out pair of running shoes, and sure enough, they grabbed it the second I set it down. I tried to shake it off, telling myself they were probably just eccentric. Some people had their quirks, and as long as they were not causing harm, it was not really my problem. Still, my heart raced every time I touched something new, knowing it would soon disappear into their cart. I began deliberately touching random things just to throw them off, but they were relentless, collecting everything without a second thought. As the afternoon wore on, I got called to the front register to help with the line of customers that had grown out of control. I welcomed the task, hoping the customer would finally leave me alone. I rang up a few customers smoothly until, of course, the familiar face appeared in my line, cart piled so high it teetered with every push. I glanced at the heap and recognized nearly every single item. Scanning each item felt surreal, like I was reliving my entire shift in fast forward. Coffee makers, sheets, blenders, picture frames, clearance items, even the chipped ceramic cat, all passed over the scanner with a beep. I forced a smile and made small talk, trying to act as if everything was normal. Inside, I felt a strange mix of amusement and discomfort swirling in my gut. But when I finished scanning, the customer handed over a card and paid without blinking at the staggering total. I handed them the receipt, and they nodded, cart barely containing the mountain of products. I watched them struggle out the door, juggling bags and pushing the overloaded cart, disappearing into the parking lot. I shook my head, finally allowing myself a deep breath of relief. After they left, I leaned against the counter for a moment, gathering my thoughts. My coworkers teased me lightly when they noticed how many empty spaces were left where I had stocked earlier. I laughed along with them, the tension slowly draining away now that the customer was gone. It became a weird inside joke for the rest of the shift, with coworkers joking that my touch had the magic of instant sales. As the sun began to set and my shift neared its end, I reflected on the day with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. It was one of the strangest work days I had ever experienced, but at least it ended safely. I clocked out at 5 p.m., slinging my bag over my shoulder and stepping out into the cool evening air. The parking lot was mostly empty now, the chaos of the day settling into a calm stillness. Walking to my car, I laughed quietly to myself, realizing how bizarrely lucky the store had been to have that customer spend so much. I guess in a strange way I had helped boost sales without even trying. Maybe tomorrow would be a little more normal, or maybe not. Either way, I felt grateful that the day had ended without any real trouble, and even more grateful to finally be heading home. Driving away from the store, I thought about how unpredictable retail could be, how every shift could turn into a story worth telling. Some days were slow, others chaotic, and some downright strange. But in the end, it was just another piece of the puzzle that made the job interesting. Smiling to myself, I rolled down the window and let the fresh air wash away the lingering weirdness of the day, ready to leave it all behind. Story 7. It all started one quiet afternoon when a package arrived at my doorstep. I had not been expecting anything, but curiosity got the better of me, so I picked it up. It was a plain brown box with no return address and no markings, except my name and home address. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table, wondering if I had simply forgotten about an online order. After a few moments of hesitation, I decided to open it and find out what was inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a faint metallic scent that instantly made me uneasy. Inside was a small, old-fashioned music box with intricate carvings of wilted flowers. When I wound it up, it played a slow, haunting tune that I did not recognize. I felt a chill crawl up my spine and quickly shut the lid. I convinced myself it was probably a mistake and tucked the box away in a drawer, trying not to think much of it. The next day, another package appeared, sitting neatly by the front door. It was identical to the first, and once again there was no return address or clue as to who had sent it. My heart raced as I carried it inside, my hands trembling slightly. I placed it on the counter and stared at it for a long time before finally cutting it open. This time, it contained a Polaroid photo of my backyard, taken from a high angle that suggested someone had climbed a tree or used a ladder. I tried to reason with myself, thinking maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank by a neighbor. Still, I could not shake the sense of being watched, the feeling of invisible eyes following me wherever I went. That night I hardly slept, jumping at every creak and whisper of the house settling. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind against the window seemed like a warning. I vowed to install security cameras the very next morning. Despite my anxiety, I went about my daily routine, pretending everything was fine. Around 10 a.m., yet another package arrived, and this one was even more unsettling than the others. It was heavier, wrapped tightly in layers of tape that made it difficult to open. After struggling with it for several minutes, I peeled back the last layer to reveal a small, battered journal. Its cover was stained, and when I opened it, I found page after page filled with frantic, messy handwriting, each line repeating the same phrase over and over. "You cannot escape." The words blurred together, making me dizzy as I flipped through the pages. My breathing became shallow, and I dropped the journal onto the floor, feeling my stomach churn with fear. Whoever was sending these packages knew where I lived, what my house looked like, and possibly even my daily habits. I decided to call the police, but when I explained the situation, they said there was little they could do without a clear threat. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever. The following morning, just as I was debating whether to stay at a hotel for a few days, another package showed up. This one was smaller, almost dainty compared to the others, and wrapped in elegant white paper tied with a red ribbon. I knew better than to open it, but curiosity gnawed at me until I gave in. Inside was a single black feather, long and sleek, resting atop a velvet cushion. Beneath it was a note written in the same frantic handwriting as the journal. Soon. I dropped the box as if it had burned me and backed away until my legs hit the couch. Every instinct told me to run, to get as far away from my house as possible. Instead, I fortified my doors and windows, making sure every lock was secured and every curtain drawn tight. I could not bear the thought of leaving and returning to find something even worse waiting for me. Fear rooted me in place, paralyzing me more effectively than any chain or lock could. That night, I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching a baseball bat and waiting for something to happen. Hours passed in agonizing silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake by a loud knock at the door. My heart slammed against my ribs as I crept toward the peephole, half expecting to see some masked figure staring back at me. But there was no one there. Only another package. I refused to open it right away, instead dragging it inside and staring at it from across the room. It sat there, silent and menacing, daring me to see what new horror it held. As the sun rose, casting pale light through the cracks in the curtains, I finally gathered enough courage to approach it. This box was different, wrapped in black paper and sealed with wax bearing a strange symbol I did not recognize. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside was a mirror, old and cracked, with a small slip of paper tucked underneath it. I unfolded the paper and read the message written in a shaky hand. "Look behind you." My body froze, my breath catching painfully in my throat. I could feel the weight of a presence just beyond my field of vision, a heavy silence pressing down on me. Slowly, I turned around, heart hammering so loudly it was all I could hear. But there was nothing there. Only the empty room, lit with the pale gold of the morning sun. Something inside me snapped then, the fear giving way to anger and determination. I would not let whoever was tormenting me win. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and left the house without looking back. I drove to a motel several towns away, paid cash for a room, and spent the next few days hiding out and making plans. During that time, I changed my phone number, closed all my social media accounts, and contacted a trusted real estate agent to put my house on the market. I knew I could not stay there any longer, not after everything that had happened. Moving would not guarantee my safety, but it was a start. I needed to reclaim my life, piece by piece. But weeks passed without any new packages, and slowly, I began to feel normal again. I found a small apartment in a bustling city where anonymity was easy to maintain. The noise of traffic and crowds was a comfort, drowning out the lingering echoes of my fear. I bought new locks, installed cameras, and built a life carefully, deliberately, one step at a time. Sometimes late at night, I would still feel the prickle of unseen eyes watching me. I would remember the music box's haunting melody, the Polaroid of my backyard, the cracked mirror, and the words urging me to look behind me. But I refused to live in fear. I refused to let whoever had sent those packages steal any more of my peace. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker to life, I realized something important. They had tried to break me, to trap me in a prison of fear, but they had failed. I was still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. No package, no message, no shadow in the night could take that from me. I would never know who had sent those disturbing packages or why they had chosen me. Maybe they had moved on to another target, or maybe they were still out there, waiting and watching. It did not matter anymore. What mattered was that I had escaped their grasp and built something stronger in its place. As the city buzzed around me, full of life and noise and light, I allowed myself a rare smile. I was free. Story 8. I was heading home one evening, just after the rush hour, when I spotted a phone lying on one of the benches at the train station. It was a sleek black model, the screen slightly cracked at the corner, and there was no one nearby who seemed to be searching for it. I looked around a few times, half expecting someone to run up and claim it, but the platform stayed empty. My fingers hesitated over the device before I finally picked it up, figuring I could turn it into the station office. As I held it, the screen lit up with a soft buzz, showing a background image of the city skyline at dusk. Curiosity gnawed at me as I made my way to the exit. I told myself I would just try to find some contact information, maybe call a family member listed on the lock screen. Strangely, there was no passcode, no fingerprint lock, nothing stopping me from swiping right into the phone's home screen. My heart beat faster as I opened the contacts, expecting to find a name or maybe an emergency contact label. Instead, there were no contacts at all, just an empty list staring back at me. I frowned and decided to check the messages next, thinking maybe someone had texted recently. The message app was also empty, with not even a welcome message from the carrier. It was strange, unsettling even, but part of me was too intrigued to stop poking around. Finally, I tapped on the gallery, figuring that would at least give me a clue about who owned the phone. The moment the images loaded, a chill ran down my spine, so cold I felt my hands tremble. The gallery was full of photos, hundreds of them, sorted by date, each neatly organized into folders. I opened the most recent one first, and that was when I saw it. A picture of me, sitting on the train reading a book, taken from several seats away. My stomach twisted sharply as I swiped to the next picture, then the next, and the next, and the next. Each image showed me in different places, at different times, over the last several weeks. There was one of me buying groceries at the corner market, balancing bags on both arms. Another of me eating alone at my favorite diner, my fork frozen in midair as I smiled absently at something on my phone. Another still of me standing at a streetlight, waiting for the green signal, completely unaware of the camera. The more I swiped, the more my dread grew, turning into a nauseating knot in my gut. Whoever owned this phone had been following me for weeks. I wanted to drop the phone right there and run, but something in me needed to know more. I backed out of the photo album and checked the video files next, praying there would be nothing, but knowing deep down I would not be that lucky. The first video opened with a shaky frame of me jogging at the park early one morning, the timestamp barely a week old. I could hear my own footsteps pounding against the pavement, hear myself panting in the early chill, completely oblivious to the person recording me from a distance. A second video showed me coming out of my apartment building, keys jangling in my hand as I headed toward the bus stop. I felt sick, pressing the back button hard enough that I thought the screen might crack further. Whoever had been stalking me was not just casually snapping a few shots now and then. They were recording my movements, tracking my daily routines, watching me when I thought I was alone. My mind raced with questions. Why me? Who would do this? Trying to steady my breathing, I checked the Notes app, wondering if there were any clues hidden there. My hands were clammy as I scrolled through cryptic entries, each one listing dates, times, and locations. It was a log, a record of everywhere I had been. Train stations, coffee shops, the park, even the library I sometimes visited to read in peace. Every movement I had made over the past month was neatly listed, like someone was planning something terrible. I sat down on a bench, my knees weak, the world around me suddenly tilting at a sickening angle. I needed to call for help, to get someone to meet me, to turn this phone in immediately. I opened the phone app to call 911, but there was no signal. None at all, like the phone had been modified, somehow isolated from any network. I dug into my own pocket, pulling out my phone and dialing 911 with trembling fingers. I explained everything quickly to the operator, my words tumbling over each other in a panicked mess. They promised to send an officer right away and told me to stay put, to remain where I was, and not touch anything else on the phone. I nodded even though they could not see me, clutching the lost phone tightly in both hands like it might somehow slip away if I did not. For minutes dragged by, each second stretching endlessly as I sat there, watching every person who passed by with suspicion. Finally, a uniformed officer approached, his hand resting lightly on his belt. I stood up quickly, explaining what had happened, showing him the phone and all the evidence on it. He took the device from me carefully, slipping it into an evidence bag and jotting down a few notes. He asked me some questions, where I had found it, if I had noticed anyone suspicious nearby, if I had seen anyone following me before. I answered as best I could, my voice still shaking. The officer told me they would look into it, that they would try to trace the phone's origins and figure out who had been watching me. He assured me I would be contacted soon and advised me to stay alert, to be cautious, and to report anything strange immediately. I nodded again, feeling a little better just knowing someone was taking it seriously. He offered me a ride home, but I declined, feeling too anxious to be trapped inside a vehicle with someone, even a police officer. I made it home after a tense, hurried walk, double-checking over my shoulder every few steps. I locked every door and window, pulled all the curtains shut, and sat in the middle of my living room, trying to breathe normally. I kept my own phone nearby, ready to call for help if anything seemed off. That night I barely slept, every creak of the building making me jump, every shadow seeming to stretch longer than it should. Days passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normal. The police contacted me once, saying they had found fingerprints on the phone but no matches in their system yet. They were still investigating, still trying to figure out who had been behind it. They recommended some personal security measures, and I followed every one of them religiously. I installed new locks, changed my routines, and even bought a few security cameras for my apartment. Weeks went by with no further incidents, and I began to breathe easier again. I told myself maybe whoever it was had gotten scared off once the police got involved. Maybe they had realized they would be caught eventually. Maybe I had finally been left alone. Little by little, I allowed myself to hope that it was over. One afternoon, a package arrived at my door with no return address. My stomach dropped as I stared at it, every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone. I called the police immediately, and they came to check it out. It turned out to be harmless, just an empty box, but it rattled me badly. Still, the officer said it was a common tactic used by people to intimidate and not necessarily connected to my case. Months passed, and nothing else strange happened. I took self-defense classes, built a small network of friends who I kept updated on my whereabouts, and stayed cautious without living in fear. Over time, I reclaimed my sense of safety, piece by piece. The fear never fully went away, but it dulled into something manageable, something I could live with. One morning, as I jogged through the park under the early sun, I realized I was smiling again, genuinely smiling. I had survived something terrifying, and I had not let it break me. I was stronger now, more aware, more determined to protect myself. Whatever dark plans someone once had for me, I had refused to be their victim. I had taken back my life, and I was not giving it up again. Story 9. I stopped at the gas station late in the evening, just as the sky turned a dull gray. The long drive had taken its toll on me, and I needed a quick break before pushing through the last few hours home. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. I grabbed my things from the car, locked the doors, and headed towards the bathroom at the side of the building. It looked old and a little run down, but it would do for a quick stop. Inside, the bathroom was cramped and smelled of disinfectant that barely masked something worse. I shut the door behind me, twisting the lock into place, relieved to have a moment alone. The mirror was cracked, and the hum of the overhead fan buzzed steadily in the background. As I turned on the faucet to wash my hands, I heard the sound of someone rattling the door. I assumed it was just someone else needing to use the bathroom and called out that it was occupied. The rattling stopped, but before I could finish drying my hands, the door creaked open and a man slipped inside. My heart jumped in my chest as I realized the lock had not worked properly. The man stood in front of the door, blocking my way out, his eyes wide and almost desperate. I backed up instinctively, pressing myself against the grimy sink. He stared at me for a long moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. He called me by a name I had never heard before, a name that clearly meant something to him. His voice shook slightly, filled with emotion, like he was seeing a ghost. I shook my head, telling him he had the wrong person, but he did not seem to hear me. Instead, he took a step closer, searching my face as if trying to find traces of someone he had lost. I kept my hands raised, trying to stay calm while my mind raced for a way out. He began talking rapidly, sharing memories that meant nothing to me but seemed to mean everything to him. He spoke of days spent in small towns, of promises made under the stars, of arguments that tore two people apart. I insisted again that I was not who he thought I was, but he only shook his head stubbornly. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But the way he stood between me and the door kept my fear alive. I inched toward the door, pretending to listen, hoping to catch him off guard. Every time I shifted, though, he mirrored me, as if he could sense my intentions. I told him gently that he needed to let me go, that whoever he was looking for was not me. He muttered that I had left him once and would not leave again. The air in the small bathroom felt heavier with each word he spoke. I glanced around, searching for anything I could use to defend myself if necessary. There was nothing but a broken soap dispenser and a flimsy paper towel roll. The window above the toilet was too small to crawl through. I realized that if I was going to get out, it had to be through him. He kept talking, painting vivid pictures of a past life that I had no part in, his voice growing more frantic. I tried a different approach, speaking calmly and asking him about the memories he shared. I figured if I kept him talking, maybe I could find a crack in his focus. He told me about a night by a river, about a fight that had driven them apart. His words were so heartfelt, so raw, that I almost believed him for a second. But reality pressed back hard, reminding me that I was a stranger trapped with a man clinging to a ghost. Suddenly he reached out and grabbed my wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough that I could not easily pull away. I told him again that I was not who he thought I was, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. He looked at me with such sadness that it almost broke my heart. He whispered an apology, but his grip tightened. Panic surged through me as I realized the situation could spiral quickly. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. I told him that if he truly cared about the person he thought I was, he would not hurt me. That seemed to reach him in some small way. His grip loosened slightly, and his shoulders sagged. He looked so lost standing there, like a man caught between two realities. I seized the moment, pulling my hand free and stepping quickly toward the door. He did not stop me this time, just watched with a hollow expression. My fingers fumbled with the handle, but finally the door swung open. I stepped out into the cool evening air, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The world outside felt so vivid and alive compared to the stuffy bathroom. The cashier inside the gas station looked up as I stumbled back toward the store. I must have looked shaken, because he immediately asked if I was all right. I nodded quickly, not wanting to explain, not knowing how to even begin. Instead, I pointed toward the bathroom and mumbled something about someone needing help. He grabbed his phone, probably to call 911, and I made my way back to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, locking the doors and trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the steering wheel, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. I watched as a police cruiser pulled into the lot a few minutes later, lights flashing but sirens silent. I did not stay to see what would happen next. Instead, I pulled back onto the highway, grateful to put miles between myself and that gas station. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and endless, but for the first time that night I felt something close to peace. I had gotten out. I was safe. Whatever sadness or madness had trapped that man, it was not mine to carry. I kept driving, focusing on the road, the hum of the engine, the steady rhythm of my heartbeat slowing back to normal. I thought about how fragile everything could be, how easily a wrong place at the wrong time could change everything. But tonight it had not changed me. I was still me, whole and unharmed, moving forward. By the time I saw the lights of my hometown glowing faintly on the horizon, the fear had faded to a distant memory. I promised myself to always trust my instincts, to stay alert, and most of all, to never let fear control my life. For that night could have ended differently, but it had not. I was stronger than the fear, stronger than the past that did not belong to me. Story 10. I pulled into the motel parking lot just after 7 p.m., exhausted from the long drive. The neon sign buzzed and flickered above the entrance, casting a dull pink light over the cracked pavement. I did not expect much from the place, just a clean bed and a hot shower to wash off the miles. After checking in, I dragged my suitcase up the stairs to the second floor and found my room at the far end of the hall. The door creaked when I pushed it open, revealing a small, plain space with a queen bed, a battered dresser, and a humming mini-fridge. I tossed my bag onto the chair and sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing my temples. It was not luxury, but it would do for the night. I turned on the television to some static-filled sitcom rerun, letting the noise fill the otherwise quiet room. Just as I kicked off my shoes and leaned back against the headboard, the room phone rang loudly on the nightstand. Startled, I reached over and picked it up, pressing the receiver to my ear. The voice on the other end was chipper and familiar, the same one who had checked me in just minutes ago. They asked if I was settling in all right, and I assured them I was fine. Thinking that was the end of it, I thanked them and hung up. A few minutes later, the phone rang again, the shrill tone making me flinch. Again, it was the front desk clerk, asking what I thought of the decor and telling me about the renovations they were planning. I tried to be polite, thinking maybe they were just proud of their work, but after I hung up, the phone rang again within 10 minutes. This time they wanted to know what kind of television shows I liked. Their voice was cheerful, almost overly so, and I began to feel a strange unease settle in my chest. I answered as vaguely as possible, hoping to end the conversation quickly. When I finally hung up again, I yanked the phone cord from the wall and let out a long breath. I figured that would be the end of it, But 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. My stomach tightened. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole, half expecting to see a stranger, but it was the clerk, smiling and waving. They called out, saying they were just checking in personally to make sure everything was perfect. I backed away from the door quietly, heart pounding in my ears. After a few minutes, they finally walked away, and I sat on the bed, debating what to do. I could leave, but I was dead tired, and there were not many other options nearby at that hour. Besides, maybe they would leave me alone now. I tried to convince myself it was just overzealous customer service. I turned off the television, changed into my pajamas, and slid under the covers, pulling the blanket up to my chin. Sleep came in fitful bursts, every little creak and distant footstep in the hallway snapping me awake. Around 2 a.m., I heard the phone ringing faintly through the wall, even though my own phone was still unplugged. It sounded like it was coming from the front desk, echoing down the hallway. But I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between rings, wondering if they were trying to call other rooms now. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to be woken by another knock at the door around 3 a.m. This time there was no cheerful voice, just the soft thud of knuckles on wood, repeated 3 times. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, hoping they would think I was not there. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps retreat down the hall and a door closing somewhere near the lobby. Morning could not come fast enough. At the first light of dawn, I threw on my clothes, packed my bag in record time, and checked through the peephole one last time. The hallway was empty. I opened the door slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and crept down the stairs to the lobby. The desk was unmanned, a bell sitting on the counter next to a handwritten note saying, "Back in 5 minutes." I did not wait. I slid my key across the counter and hurried out the door into the bright, cool morning. My car was the only one in the parking lot besides an old pickup truck. I tossed my bag into the passenger seat and started the engine, my hands shaking a little as I pulled out onto the road. As the motel faded from view in my rearview mirror, I promised myself I would never book a budget motel again without reading reviews first. I drove a few miles until I found a diner that looked open and safe. I parked and went inside, the smell of coffee and bacon immediately calming my nerves. I took a seat by the window and ordered a huge breakfast, letting the chatter of the other diners wash over me like a comfort blanket. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about how strange the whole experience had been. Maybe the clerk was just lonely and meant no harm, but the way they acted still sent a chill down my spine. By the time I finished my breakfast, the sun was high, and the fear that had gripped me overnight had started to fade. I got back on the road with a new sense of caution, but also a little pride in myself for trusting my instincts and staying safe. The rest of my trip went smoothly, filled with beautiful landscapes and quiet, welcoming towns. Whenever I booked a place to stay after that, I made sure to call ahead and get a feel for the atmosphere. Looking back, I realized that sometimes people cross lines without even realizing it. Maybe the clerk was desperate for connection in a lonely place, or maybe they just did not know when to stop. Either way, I knew how important it was to listen to the small voice inside that says something is not right. I did not let that one bad night ruin my trip, and I carried that lesson with me long after I returned home. It reminded me that sometimes the best way to stay safe is simply to trust yourself and act quickly when something feels off. Story 11. I had been saving up for months, looking for the right car, something reliable and affordable. The old sedan I had been driving was on its last legs, and I was tired of constantly worrying if it would start in the morning. I scoured the classifieds online, checking the listings daily. Then one evening I found what seemed like the perfect car, a used vehicle with a decent price tag and all the features I was looking for. The seller seemed friendly enough, offering a price that was too good to pass up. I arranged to meet the seller in a quiet part of town, the car parked in front of his house. The vehicle looked well kept on the outside, though I could tell it had been driven for a few years. The paint was a little faded, but it ran smoothly when I took it for a test drive. The seller assured me that everything was in good condition and that the car had been well maintained. I felt a bit of hesitation as I handed over the cash, but I dismissed the feeling, telling myself I was just overthinking things. After the exchange, I drove the car back home, feeling a strange mix of excitement and relief. I couldn't wait to have a reliable car again, one that wouldn't break down every time I needed it. The ride was comfortable, and the car seemed to run well. However, once I parked it in my driveway and took a closer look, I noticed something odd. The interior, although clean, smelled a bit off, a faint odor that I couldn't quite place. It didn't seem to come from any specific spot, but I decided it could just be from sitting unused for a while. The next morning, I decided to give the car a thorough cleaning, starting with the seats. I pulled off the seat covers, planning to give them a good wash. As I removed the fabric, my eyes fell on something dark under the seat's dried blood, smeared across the upholstery. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the dark stain, unsure of what I was looking at. The blood was old, dried up and crusted, but still visible. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as I wondered what had happened in that car. I quickly pulled my hands back, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. How had I missed it before? I had checked the car when I test drove it, but I hadn't seen anything like this. Was the seller aware of this? Had he cleaned the car, or was this something he had deliberately hidden? My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them comforting. I started to feel uneasy, unsure of what to do next. I couldn't just ignore it, but I also didn't want to jump to conclusions. My first instinct was to call the seller, to confront him about what I had found. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number he had given me, my fingers shaking slightly as I waited for him to pick up. When he finally answered, his voice was calm, almost too calm. I explained what I had discovered, asking if he knew anything about the blood. His response was immediate and dismissive, claiming it was nothing, that the car had been cleaned thoroughly before I bought it. He insisted that the stain must have been there before he sold it to me, and that it was no big deal. I wasn't convinced. His tone sounded off, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. Something about it felt wrong. I told him I wasn't satisfied with his explanation, and that I would be taking the car to a mechanic to get it checked. He seemed unfazed, but I could sense a hint of tension in his voice when I mentioned the mechanic. He quickly ended the conversation, and I was left standing in my driveway, staring at the blood-stained seat covers in disbelief. I decided to take the car to a local mechanic, someone I trusted, to inspect it. As I drove there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every car that passed seemed to linger just a little too long. When I arrived at the mechanic's shop, I parked the car and immediately explained the situation. The mechanic, a seasoned professional who had worked on cars for years, seemed puzzled when I showed him the bloodstain. He agreed that it was unusual and that he would look it over carefully. I waited in the small office while the mechanic worked on the car. My mind was racing, thinking back to the seller's words. Was he lying to me? Did he know about the blood, or was it an unfortunate coincidence? I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut the sense that something wasn't right. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what he hadn't told me. After what felt like hours, the mechanic came back inside, his face serious. He didn't mince words. He confirmed that the blood was indeed old, likely from some kind of violent event. There were also other signs inside the car that suggested it had been involved in something much darker than a simple fender bender. He didn't know all the details, but he strongly recommended that I report it to the police. I was in shock, barely able to process what he was saying. The car I had just bought had a dark history, one I hadn't bargained for. I left the mechanic's shop and immediately called the police. They arrived at my house a short time later, taking the car for further inspection. They asked me questions, and I told them everything I knew, from the seller's behavior to the bloodstain under the seats. They were professional but didn't offer much in terms of reassurance. They told me they would look into the cellar and get back to me with more information. The next few days were a blur. The police called me in for questioning, asking me to provide more details about the transaction. I was terrified, not knowing if I had inadvertently bought something connected to a crime. The seller's name was quickly flagged in their system, and they discovered that he had been involved in several criminal activities in the past. Apparently, the car had once belonged to someone who had been severely injured in a violent incident, but it had been sold to the seller after the previous owner's death. I was horrified as the police filled in the details. The car had been at the scene of a brutal attack, and the bloodstain under the seat was just one of many indicators that something sinister had happened. The seller had somehow managed to clean it up enough to make it look like a regular used car, but the signs were still there. I felt sick to my stomach, realizing that I had unknowingly purchased a vehicle tied to a crime. Fortunately, the police were able to track down the seller and question him further. He was arrested and charged with several offenses related to the car's history. I was cleared of any involvement and given the option to return the car. The police even arranged for me to be reimbursed for the money I had spent on it. I had to sign some paperwork and cooperate with their investigation, but in the end, the ordeal was over. The whole experience left me shaken. I had never imagined that buying a car could lead to such a nightmare. I was lucky that I had discovered the truth before it was too late. The thought of what might have happened if I had ignored the signs haunted me for a long time. In the end, I found a different car from a reputable dealer, one with a clean history and no hidden surprises. I drove it home with a sense of relief, grateful to be moving on from the terrifying ordeal, but always remembering the lesson: never trust too easily, and always be cautious when something feels off. Story 12. I had just finished a long day of meetings and was eager to get home. The city had that buzz, the hum of life on every corner, but the traffic was thick. It was the kind of evening where you just wanted to get in, sit back, and let someone else do the driving. I pulled out my phone and requested a rideshare, looking forward to the peace of being driven while I scrolled through messages from friends and family. The car arrived in minutes, a nondescript sedan, the driver giving me a nod as I slid into the back seat. He seemed like most drivers, quiet, focused on the road with the low hum of a playlist playing in the background. I gave a small smile in greeting, but he didn't respond much, keeping his attention firmly on the street ahead. I didn't mind the silence. After all, it was the kind of tired day that didn't call for small talk. At first, everything was normal. The car made its way through the busy streets, weaving through the traffic with little effort. I barely paid attention as we turned down familiar roads, heading in the direction of my neighborhood. I felt the weight of exhaustion slowly beginning to lift. a sense of relief at the thought of finally reaching home and curling up in bed. No. Then, without warning, the driver turned sharply off the main road. My body tensed instinctively, my hand gripping the seat beneath me. The street was darker here, the overhead lights fewer and farther apart, casting long shadows along the sides of the road. I glanced at the driver, wondering if this was some kind of detour or mistake. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, though there was a slight edge to it. The driver didn't respond immediately. He only glanced at me in the rearview mirror for a split second before returning his eyes to the road. There was something odd about the way he did it too quick, almost like he was avoiding my gaze. "I need to check something first," he said, his voice flat and unbothered. I could tell he wasn't telling me everything, but I didn't want to escalate things by pushing him. After all, he was still my ride to safety, or so I thought. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, feeling a slight unease begin to crawl up my spine. The car slowed as we drove down this unfamiliar stretch of road, and I couldn't help but notice that the houses along the sides of the street were spaced out, each one sitting far back from the road, with tall trees or fences obscuring the view. There was an unsettling stillness to the area, as if the world had gone silent just for us. The road seemed to get narrower, and the streetlights less frequent. My pulse quickened, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if something in my gut was screaming that I was heading in the wrong direction. I shifted in my seat again, trying to find a way to make the situation feel less dangerous, less wrong, but the more I thought about it, the more the fear began to take root. "How much longer?" I asked, my voice more clipped than I intended. The driver didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another turn, this one even sharper, pulling the car further into the darkened road. My mind raced as I tried to recall any landmarks that could help me get my bearings, but everything looked unfamiliar. "I'm just checking something. Won't be long," he finally responded, his voice too calm for the situation.